Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs, and as you can see, I'm not in the Joe Blogs studio today. I'm actually at a far-flung location. I've got the sea just behind me here, got a palm tree just to the side. And if you're interested in knowing where I am, then check out the Joe Blogs travel channel. I'll be posting some videos soon. But in today's video, I actually wanted to talk to you about what's happening in the Russian economy, because as you're probably aware, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have a meeting set in Alaska on Friday, and they're going to talk about the potential for some sort of peace deal, bringing the war in Ukraine to an end. And you have to take a step back and think about why Vladimir Putin is wanting to do that. I get a lot of messages on this channel all the time from people telling me that Russia is doing really well, the Russian economy is actually performing stronger than ever, and Russia doesn't need to end the war in Ukraine. And if all of that is true, then why would Vladimir Putin be wanting some sort of meeting with Donald Trump? Because if Russia is doing well, if it's thriving as a result of the war in Ukraine, then surely there's no reason to stop it, because Russia is trying to get hold of the 20% of Ukraine that it's currently occupying, and also a little bit more, to take all of the regions that it's invaded, because President Putin believes that the people in those areas predominantly should be Russian rather than Ukrainian. But as I've talked about many times before on this channel, the Russian economy currently is in a state of peril. It's actually doing really badly. And one of the reasons why is because of this shift to the wartime economy. Now, on paper, moving to a wartime economy looks like it's actually good for GDP, because you get lots of companies that are currently thriving. They're being paid directly by the Kremlin to produce things for the war effort in Ukraine, and so they're having record-breaking results. They're producing things, they're getting paid, they're hiring people left, right and centre, and what that's done is actually cause a two-tier economy. So we've got the companies that are actually being paid by the state, so they are doing well, they're having a bonus time. However, every other company in Russia is suffering. Firstly, because of the sanctions, because the sanctions have taken away a huge part of the global market for those companies. So they're no longer able to sell into the West, into the USA, into all of the markets that they were selling into previously. But in addition to that, they're also now facing problems selling into the markets that they can still access because of the threat of secondary sanctions. So over the last 2 years, the USA has ramped up these secondary sanctions, and also the European Union, to be fair. And they're saying that if any company, any bank, any financial institution is found to be dealing with Russian entities, Russian individuals, Russian oligarchs that have been sanctioned, then those entities will also face the same sanctions. So what that's done is cause a wave of panic in India and China, and so the financial institutions are having to go through things with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that none of the payments that they're making fall foul of any of the sanctions. So that's slowed down the payment process, it's reduced the amount of cash that Russian businesses have got, but also it's reducing the markets, because many companies are saying, well, actually, we'd rather just deal elsewhere. So that's causing problems for Russian companies. But one of the other things that's really hurting now is the threat of these super secondary sanctions. So Donald Trump has said that if this war doesn't come to an end soon, then he's going to basically find all of the Indian and Chinese companies that are still buying Russian energy products, and he's going to hit them with a very penal secondary tariff. So basically, he's talking about 100%, so that would basically mean that any imports into India after the end of this ceasefire period that Donald Trump announced, where we've actually gone past it now, the 9 or 10 or 12 day period, whatever it was, any imports into the USA would face a 100% tariff, and actually there's a bill going through at the moment that would increase that to 500%. So basically what that would mean is that India and China, if they continued buying Russian oil, Russian gas, Russian coal, then the market would be closed to them. They wouldn't be able to export anything to the USA. And as we've talked about many times before, the USA is the biggest single market, it's the biggest single economy, and it's really important to India and China, much more important than buying cheap oil and gas from Russia because you can buy those things from lots of other countries. So there's no need for India and China to keep buying from Russia. But from Russia's point of view, they are desperate to keep those sales, because if they were to end tomorrow, then the Russian economy would be completely bankrupt. It would be blown out of the water. So Russia is currently facing all of that threat, in addition to the problems that Russian companies are having, apart from the ones that are sponsored by the state. But when you think about those state-sponsored companies, they're actually being paid by the National Wealth Fund, because the Russian economy doesn't have enough money. It's not generating enough capital to keep paying all of those sponsored companies. So Russia is rapidly running out of cash, and this is becoming a major problem. And one of the other factors that's now weighing heavily on the Russian economy is, at the start of the war, the Kremlin authorized bank loans to lots of Russian companies that were helping with the war effort. So those state-sponsored companies, if they want to borrow, they can borrow very easily, so they don't have to go through a rigorous process, and the money that they're borrowing is very cheap. So the Russian banks have been told to give those companies subsidized loans. And of course, who's subsidizing those loans? The Russian state. So that's a further drain on the Russian coffers, because they're having to subsidize the banks to give these low-rate loans to the Russian companies that are helping with the war effort. And if you've been following the channel, you'll know that interest rates in Russia are sky high at the moment. They were up at 21% recently. They're now down to 18%. But 18% is still phenomenally high. If you compare that to what's happening around the rest of the world, it's multiples above what everybody else is paying. So Russia is gradually seeing its economy falling apart. And we are seeing insolvencies. We're seeing companies now reporting that they've got no cash, they've got nowhere to go. They're going to have to go to the banks to continue trading. And that can't last forever either. That will just lead to a collapse of those companies and ultimately a collapse of the Russian economy. So the main driver why President Putin wants to meet with Donald Trump isn't because he just thinks it's a good time to agree a peace settlement, that he feels that enough is enough. That isn't the situation. The reason why Russia is coming around the table is because the economy is on the verge of collapse. If this war carries on for another 12 months, 18 months, 5 years, then Russia will run out of cash. It won't be able to keep funding all of these companies. It won't be able to keep funding the war. Over the last 12 months, Russia has spent something like $170 billion on the war effort. Now, that is a massive amount. That's somewhere in the region of 8% of Russia's GDP. And it's not getting any return on that. There's no income coming back. There's no revenue coming back. That's literally a sunk cost. And Russia wants to ramp up its efforts. Now, interestingly, if you've been following the press, you may be aware that in the days leading up to this meeting in Alaska, Russia has actually been pushing forward on a number of different fronts. It's taken around another 6 miles of territory. It's sent somewhere in the region of 100,000 troops to the front line to really push back Ukrainian forces. And of course, the reason why Russia is doing that is because President Putin believes that Donald Trump is going to offer a deal whereby Russia gets to keep what it's holding at the moment. So the more land that it's holding at the time that that agreement is signed, then the more land that Russia gets to keep. So that's the theory from Russia's point of view. Now, Donald Trump, interestingly, hasn't invited Ukraine to this meeting, which I think is interesting, because if you put yourself in the shoes of Ukraine, if you think of you having a dispute with your neighbour, let's say you were having an argument about your boundary, where the fence should be for your garden versus your neighbour's garden, and maybe this has been going on for 3 years, and then another neighbour comes along and says, hang on, I'm going to sort this dispute out for you. What I'm going to do is have a meeting with your neighbour without you being present and agree the deal. Now, if you were in those shoes, you would say, no way. I want to be in that meeting because I don't want you agreeing anything on my behalf without me having seen what the deal is and agreeing to sign up to it. But that's essentially what's happening in this meeting in Alaska, that Donald Trump is meeting with Vladimir Putin to talk about what should be happening in Ukraine, and Ukraine isn't going to be in that meeting. So any deal that's struck, if Donald Trump does agree a deal with Vladimir Putin, Ukraine might not agree to it. They might not sign up to handing over 20% of what was formerly Ukrainian land. So it is an interesting setup that it's only going to be the USA and Russia in this meeting. Now, Donald Trump has had discussions with Europe and Ukraine prior to this meeting, and he's now saying that this meeting will be a precursor to a second meeting whereby Zelensky from Ukraine will be invited. Now, that remains to be seen whether that happens at all. We'll have to see what the outcome of the first meeting is. But I wanted to post this video from this really quite nice location. You know, it's nice to have a change, to be out of the Joe Blog studio. You can hear the sea in the background lapping up against the shore. But I wanted to post this video because this meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin is the first between Russian and US leaders for a very long time, certainly since well before the war in Ukraine started. And the USA, when Joe Biden was president, was very negative towards Russia's position. Donald Trump has been a bit more open in terms of trying to get a peace deal agreed. But this meeting could be a turning point in the war, and therefore could be a turning point in Russia's economy, because if the war economy does come to an end, if the war finishes and therefore Russia stops sponsoring all of these companies, then we could see a rapid implosion in Russia, because if the state is no longer sponsoring those companies and all of the other companies are on the verge of bankruptcy, we could see Russia going into a very deep recession. And of course, Vladimir Putin won't want that to happen. So it's a very fine balancing act in terms of what he agrees in Alaska with Donald Trump, because he won't want to harpoon the Russian economy by agreeing to bring the war to a sudden end. So my guess is that nothing major will come out of this meeting, that we will have more talks, more discussions, lots of chat about Russia maintaining its position. Ukraine obviously won't be happy with that, and maybe we'll just get a stalemate in the discussions. They could run on for many months. But I wanted to post this video because this potentially could be a really important moment in the war in Ukraine, and also in the Russian economy and the global economy, come to speak of it. So I wanted to post this video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this quick update, seeing me here down at the beach. If you have, then please give me a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button, because I'm trying to recruit as many people as possible. I know more than half the people watching these videos are not subscribers, so please do that. Thank you to everyone that's supporting me, either through Buy Me a Coffee or YouTube Super Thanks or Patreon, YouTube membership or Buy Me a Coffee membership. Really appreciate that support, and I will see you again on the next video.